Well, thank you all for joining. I really appreciate everybody sitting in on this panel. It's an important topic, workforce development. It's something that we hear a lot about, potentially in the news. We don't really talk about some of the things that are going on and some of the things that might be happening. So I'm going to go on a longer soliloquy in a moment, but I wanted to just introduce my two co-panelists. Right next to me is James Niedermeyer, from principal for Tech Valley High School. James, you were previously a principal at Red Jacket?
Yep, Red Jacket, which is a more traditional school. So Tech Valley, for those of you who aren't familiar, is a regional public high school on the SUNY Poly campus. So we have a very small number of students, 130 students, but they're from about 31 different districts.
And you are currently going to Sage College right now as well for your?
Yep, so I'm working on my doctorate at Sage in educational leadership.
Cool. And next to you is Ethan Sprisler from Excelsior College.
Yes, hello.
Ethan, tell me a little bit about Excelsior, although I'm thinking a few of the students are already...
Excelsior is an entirely online, regionally accredited school. We have programs all across the spectrum. I'm in charge of the cybersecurity program. We have just a few hundred students enrolled in that. It's off the ground. We are a center for academic excellence, so we are in compliance with DoD guidelines. I also run the IT program, which is quite a bit larger. I have 1,500 to 2,000 students, a lot of which are military in background, either active service or veterans. I would say maybe a third. I'm also a faculty member at the University of Albany in the business program, where I also teach cybersecurity, business intelligence, that sort of thing.
I noticed on your biography, sent over to me, that you have a master's in philosophy.
I have a master's in philosophy of religion. I have a master's in information science, and I'm also working on my doctorate in informatics, specializing in encryption.
Well, so when the numbers get higher, does it become like a religion with encryption?
It can. Boredom leads to introspection, and sometimes work gets done.
Well, good. So I'm Ryan Spellman with the Center for Internet Security. Some of you may know us from the other presentation. We had some of our staff come in and talk about what it's like to work in our SOC. But for those not familiar, we are a nonprofit organization actually located across the river in East Greenbush, New York, where we serve to protect all 50 states, as well as issue a lot of best practices and other guidances. So from that perspective, I'll kind of set the stage here. We're going to kind of, each of the individuals to my left here, we'll talk a little bit about their perspective. But first, let me set the stage about workforce. As you saw in the description, there's a significant gap here. You know, you're all here to learn more about cybersecurity, or as cybersecurity professionals yourselves trying to pick up different lessons. I think you know that there is a shortage of people with your knowledge in the marketplace. It's projected that we'll be over 2 million people shy come 2021. And that number continues to go up as we fail to fill the gaps we need to with regards to the future of our workforce. And this is critical because as the cyber threats continue to grow, we don't have the people that we need in place to deal with it. So we have increasing cost of attacks, we have increasing cost of breaches, we have a situation where if you have to think about this from the point of view of law enforcement, it's as if we had more crime but less cops. We have more fires but less firefighters. We have more disease but less doctors. And that number continues to travel exponentially one way or the other. So how do we confront this? There are a lot of national standards to help you on this front. There are the NICE standards, which are issued by NIST, which NICE is a great name for really what is a career pathing. There's a lot of different funding and grant programs to help people get into cybersecurity. There are programs that are being used to help fund educational programs to help people get into cybersecurity. But ultimately, the challenge we face is one where people need to think about their career, people need to think about what they want to do with their lives, and see cybersecurity as an avenue to be successful in. Cybersecurity jobs, as many of you know, pay very well. They can sometimes pay as much as $70,000, $80,000 right out of college. The average salary in DC for a cybersecurity professional is $116,000. So these are jobs that are not, jobs to sneeze at. These are jobs with high demand, high availability, and potentially remote work capabilities, potentially the ability to work at your own schedule in the clothes that you desire. I'm wearing a suit and tie here because I failed to get the memo about this audience here, but next time I'll wear my Metallica t-shirt. The audiences that we work with regards to cybersecurity, it's a very relaxed workforce. So why are not more people getting into it? Why are we failing to fill this gap as time goes by? So I'm gonna let James and Ethan kind of talk a little bit about some of the thought process with regards to what different organizations are doing to fix this. And then I'll have a couple questions for them. And then I'm gonna turn it over to you guys in the audience to ask questions. Ultimately, the lessons I want you to take away from this is that, our community is taking action. Both James and Ethan will speak to things that they're familiar with, whether it's their own institutions or the businesses they work with that are looking to hire and bring more people into the STEM and cybersecurity fields. But also, you'll have ability to think about how do you look at your own career path and where can you fit into the cybersecurity industry. Whether you're trying to break in, transfer, move around in this space, there is no shortage of opportunities and no shortage of demand for people like you who get cybersecurity. So, James, why don't you tell me a little bit about Tech Valley High and the audience here, about what's going on there and some of the things you see in terms of how people are trying to get more kids into STEM and cybersecurity at the high school level.
Sure. So I'll back it way up and just tell you a little bit about me. And so I started my path in education as a kid who wasn't, like, demographically speaking, wouldn't have been anybody that somebody would have pegged to be a principal of a school or maybe even a graduate of a school, and certainly not a doctoral student, somebody who's running an organization like Tech Valley. So I'm pretty blessed. But just to tell you about, like, from that perspective, as a student, when I was in high school, if I think about, from my limited perspective of the menu of jobs that I knew existed, I knew of about 3. So I knew that my mom worked in a grocery store. I knew I didn't want to do that. And I also knew what my teachers did because they were the people that were in front of me every day. And so the thing that I ended up choosing between wasn't between cybersecurity and all these other fields and education. It was really between, did I want to work retail or in a grocery store, or did I want to work in education? Because those are the 2 things on my menu. And so really, it's been my goal as a school administrator to try to make kids' menus as broad as possible so that they are exposed to all of these different fields. And so I did that as a principal at Red Jacket in Western New York. We had some business partnerships, and really those are pretty limited in scope. So if you read the literature on school business partnerships, you'll find that a lot of people, a lot of them are pretty shallow in terms of what they're actually accomplishing. So they're kind of like more of a glossy thing to put on a brochure than an actual meaningful partnership that's causing something to change. At Tech Valley, it's not really like that. So Tech Valley, one of the institutions that helped found Tech Valley was this organization that we have in-house, which is a business alliance made up of 35 different businesses. And those 35 different businesses cover a lot of different grounds. So Ryan's on our business alliance, Tyler on the hallway is also on our business alliance, but we have people from lots of other different fields and higher ed and nonprofits. And the goal of these folks is really to advise us on the curriculum that we teach. So they're not just there to put it on their resume that they have done some kind of community outreach. They're actually there to advise us on what we do. And we don't ask them for money or anything like that. All we're looking for is insight into what we should be teaching that's relevant to the world that we live in and the community that we're in. And so they provide us with that. And they can work with us in lots of different ways. So they can come in to speak with our kids. We also run an experiential learning program where kids can go out and do internships during junior and senior year. They can go out as small groups junior year, and senior year they go out and do individual internships. And freshman and sophomore year, we bring kids out during that time period to see what different businesses look like. And the goal isn't really for them to find the thing that they're going to be doing for the rest of their life, but really just to broaden their menu and maybe to check some things off that they don't want to do. So for example, I would guess that not a lot of kids would understand what Ryan was talking about in terms of, what do you mean, like, I can work from home? What does that look like if they don't have a parent that does it? And so opening your doors, the doors of your organizations, to show kids what it might be like to work there, and having your folks come out to schools to talk to them about what it is would really help a lot in terms of getting people to consider this as a viable career. And also, not just looking for college kids with credentials and lots of background to do internships in your school, but to think about maybe high school kids with some advanced computer skills. And also to kind of expand beyond what you might be looking for in traditional job applicants, to look at like, what are those skills and qualities that you want people to have besides just the credentials that you want them to have earned. So those critical thinking skills, those other things, and working with schools to help develop projects to instill those traits in the kids at the schools. Like you got to actually be a person who's willing to go into the schools and be of assistance in helping to guide program. So I think if people are willing to put in the time, they can fix this, but it's nothing that you can do by just saying that you belong to an organization and checking a box. And it's not anything that you can solve either by putting up a website with a bunch of tools on it that say, how best to develop the workforce. You actually have to go and make relationships. And so that's what I would encourage, is that people, find a person like me in their community and make a relationship with them that you can use to kind of have an impact directly on kids.
That's very good, James. And before I pass it to Ethan, I just want to say that the students at Tech Valley are really quite amazing. I went to their science fair, effectively the science fair. Yeah, back in April. And it's amazing, like, genetically modified corn and drones and solar panels and just a really talented bunch of students. So if you get an opportunity to participate or learn more about this program, or if you know someone who's a STEM, a student who's interested in STEM and getting more involved in the program, definitely recommend Tech Valley High School. And again, full disclosure, I am on their advisory committee, but it's a great program. Edith, and how does higher ed, especially in Italy, I mean, you sit on a unique point because you actually lecture at SUNY Albany, as well as at Excelsior, which is a more virtual university as opposed to physical university. So how is higher ed really approaching this challenge of bringing kids into cybersecurity, or people into cybersecurity?
I can speak more directly to the Excelsior model, since that's the one that I'm overseeing. We are really picking up where secondary education leaves off. We would hope for things along the lines of what you were asking for, where normalization of this sort of job, of cybersecurity jobs, at a young age, to make it seem like something that anyone can aspire to, that it's a normal job. From our perspective, we're taking people, non-traditional students that aren't stepping directly into a four-year school. We're looking at students that get two-year schools and then they want to learn more. They want to make sure that they can get a promotion after they start that cybersecurity job. They want more skills, a better or more diverse, well-rounded background before they sort of confine themselves to one aspect of cybersecurity. We are taking those students and we are helping them finish their degrees. We are also looking and work heavily with military, the armed services. Again, we have many active service members in the Navy, in the Air Force, the Army. All three of those branches have students that come to us while they are serving, and when they are on shore duty, they come to us. Or we do occasionally work with people that are serving in tours on submarines, where we preload them with lessons ahead of time and they are able to complete them as they can while they are submerged, and when they are able to surface again, they then submit their work for us. So we are helping them prepare for either advancement in the military, or when they leave the military, we're looking to make sure that they're prepared to enter the workforce. I suppose the larger question is, what are we doing to get more?
Yeah, in terms of just how are we helping get more students interested in getting into this career field?
I think that part is something of a more complicated question. The more people see security breaches, once we look back and we see Target as being an early breach that really caught a lot of people's attention. Finding out, for instance, that they had pre-warning of essentially an inevitable breach. Or we look at breaches like Ashley Madison that became popularized with the television show with, oh my gosh, the comedian from The Daily Show.
From Jon Stewart?
Jon Stewart, but his protege.
Trevor Noah.
Not Trevor Noah.
Stephen Colbert.
Stephen Colbert, the British one. John Oliver.
That's it.
Yes, the John Oliver Show, where he did a long skit. He did about 15, 20 minutes with, about Ashley Madison and how it really affected a particular town in Canada where they had something like 1 in 5 married people were on that website, which when the people that were using Ashley Madison to meet someone else, when their client list was revealed, it put a large number of people in jeopardy, at least their relationships in jeopardy. Those seem small, but then when we move on to Equifax, where we have millions of people that were exposed. Once these stories, once these exposures become real, and they see them in the media, they read about it on Facebook or Twitter, or they see it on the television, that at least puts into the public mind that security is an issue, that we need people on the front lines that are doing something about this. Higher education is really, we're playing a game of catch-up. These problems had existed prior. There was notice that there was a wave, a tsunami coming of these issues. In 2008, 2009, there was an unfunded mandate that suggested that, for instance, all critical infrastructure have a cybersecurity program in place, that we had cybersecurity professionals in place, that we had procedures and policies to make sure that everything that our civilization essentially relies on is safe. That's great. What didn't happen is that we didn't tell students that, hey, we have jobs for you going forward. Granted, at the time, the economy was in the tank. And right now, we have unemployment that's hovering around 4%. So it's difficult to take people that already are comfortable and telling them that now is the time to transition. But for those that are more forward-looking, if we can get teachers in high schools, or even better, middle school, or even parents involved early, and tell them that there are professional jobs out there that pay well. Schooling helps. It's not always required, at least not to gain the entry-level positions. And you don't need to work the traditional route. You don't need to spend 4 years in school. You can start with 2 years, or you can start right out of high school. You can dip your toes in, and we can use your skills, your talents, your nativeness to the digital environment to help forestall any future big crises.
That's a good segue to one of my first questions for you guys, and I'll start with Ethan, actually. Work that way.
Okay.
If there's one thing, especially as a cybersecurity practitioner yourself, if there's one thing you wish somebody pursuing this career field knew going into it, what would that one thing be?
I would say, I would make sure that they knew that it is not all, the jobs no longer all strictly under the rubric of, or the heading of computer science. That there are application-based practitioners, that we need people that are familiar with sets of tools that are in common use, that are able to both monitor and sort of prevent, keep an eye on the systems that we have in place. And there are people that we have that are on the forefront of research, that they're looking for new malware that's being produced. We're looking for more structured approaches overall to protecting our infrastructure from attack. Commonly, when I talk to students, they think, oh, I don't have enough math. You know, I haven't taken Calculus 4, or I don't have this, that, and the other thing. I don't have the rarefied skill set that will allow me to do this. But instead, we have practitioners who reliably use tools on a day-to-day basis. They're using dashboards to monitor system traffic. They're not getting down into the nitty-gritty of what's happening in a packet line, but they can see that there are problems building up, and they can address resources where they're needed. And those people are needed just as much as the deep research guys. And just like Google is changing their modus operandi for hiring, they need people that can work on teams. It's not about one person sitting alone in a dark ops room banging away at a keyboard. It's about people that are being able to pass the torch to another shift, or to work in a group to try to plug one avenue instead of just relying on one mind and one perspective.
So, follow on to that one, James. You know, I know you work with a lot of employers, especially around STEM, some cybersecurity hiring. How are they approaching this? You know, as Ethan said, that there's more than just dark rooms and keyboards and hoodies. You know, how are they approaching this broader need to get different types of people to look at this? What are some of the things you see some of the industry players doing?
Well, so I think one of the more, a couple of examples come to mind. So the first example was an example I heard from one of our business partners who works at IBM, who said that now they are like specifically targeting people who have gaming degrees. There's a lot of kids who want to go into video game design. That might surprise you. But to kind of target those folks who have these skills and also critical thinking skills and the other things that people might need in this industry, and to kind of draw like what is like an abundance of people who have those degrees, those credentials over into cybersecurity. And the other one that I've seen that's I think pretty interesting is we have another person on our business alliance from Albany Can Code, and Albany Can Code is a really interesting organization that is seeking to educate multiple generations at the same time. So when they do events in the evening for kids, they also invite parents along with them, parents who might be underemployed or employed in different fields that aren't maybe careers that they want to stay in forever. So I think that those are both really interesting approaches to getting more people involved in this field.
That's a good segue to the next question, Ethan, there, because you have a philosophy and religion background, and I'm assuming that there are other things in your background that drew you to security. But what are some of the things that help people from different backgrounds get into cybersecurity? Say you didn't go to college for computer science, or say you didn't go to college. How can you get into cybersecurity as a professional level?
I think it would depend on my target audience. If I was targeting people in high school, kids at that age they're still modeling their behavior, so they need to be exposed to it. They need to know that there are job pathways, that there are people that are willing to take the time to show them not only that these jobs are out there, but these are things that you can do at home to prepare yourself for that sort of work. If I were approaching an older student, I would say, we have to assess everything in your background. Do you have problem-solving skills? Not, do you know Cal 4? Are you familiar with the latest release of Kali? Do you know these tools? No. Can you solve problems? Can you think systemically? Can you think logically? Can you follow something from the beginning to end? I would even go so far as to say, do you watch cop shows? Anything that gets people thinking, there's an adversarial approach out there, people are trying to get into something, what can I do to follow what they're doing, and what, if I were on the other side of that, how would I then prevent that from happening? That's how.
Just as a way to follow up on that, so secondary education has really done a pretty bad job of teaching anything beyond what the typical core academic subjects might be. So one of the things that we do that's a little different, and other project-based learning schools do too, is we explicitly teach like so-called 21st century skills to kids and also assess them on those skills and report those skills out. And so for example, even more than focusing on technology, we focus on collaboration, communication, technology and information literacy, and agency and self-direction. So we grade those things on every single project that we do. We put them on report cards. We specifically teach skills that are related to those outcomes, and we even tell colleges how kids do in those areas. And we had to develop standards of our own because New York State hasn't provided standards for those things. And so if more schools were convinced that it's not enough to just teach the traditional subjects, and that, schools have all bought into this idea that every teacher is a teacher of reading. Schools also need to buy into the idea that every teacher needs to be a teacher of information literacy, of critical thinking, and standards need to be developed for those things too. And we need to start assessing that in our schools so that students have the kinds of skills that are going to help them when they need to go into the field and they're being interviewed by a cyber professional. Everybody needs those things no matter which field they're going into.
So a question for you, James, because you're holding the mic. So, employers are sitting there trying to figure out how to fill this gap. They're trying to find that needle in the haystack that they're looking for to, do different things in their cybersecurity infrastructure. What should they be thinking about before they start writing the job description?
So that's a good question. So what should they be thinking about before they start writing the job description? I guess their end goals. Like anytime you write a job, anytime you're looking for somebody, what are your goals? And so is your goal to find somebody who's already fully cooked, or are you willing to put the time and effort into training those people? So I think a lot of times businesses look at educational institutions as being the sole provider of the training that that their employees are going to need. And so they try to push their training responsibilities down to an educational level. Like as long as I get somebody with this degree, they're going to have all the training that they need. And that's just not the case. And so you're going to need to put the time in. So what are the things that you can't train yourself that you need people to have? So I would say first look at personality characteristics and interests and things like that, and then secondarily you look at the actual skill things that you can teach them later on.
Okay, great. So Ethan, quick follow kind of question on that. So so it's a two-part question, and then James, you can also chime in as well too. How do we attract people from different career fields to cybersecurity? How do we help them bridge the gap? I'm thinking of like someone who's an English major, right? They're interested in cybersecurity, they watch a lot of cop shows, they realize that being an English major may not have the most lucrative job opportunities attached to it. Nothing to offend anybody who's a journalist in the audience. You're an English major? Okay, there you go. So, they're looking to transition to cybersecurity. What are the ways they can do that, and how do we attract more people from these different backgrounds, and not just the English majors of the world, but people who didn't go to college, not from traditional households, differing backgrounds? How do we attract different people to this field? So it's not just guys in hoodies and coding.
Like attracting anything, or attracting people to any discipline, you need to find people where they're at and speak to them in the language that they're familiar with. So if I were trying to reach out to English and philosophy or writing intensive majors, I would say that it's good if we can catch these people. It's better if we can communicate how we caught this particular person and the methods that we used to catch this particular person, or we identified this particular intrusion, this breach, and communicated that in language that people can understand, both to replicate our success so that other businesses could protect themselves, also how we can better relate that to the media and put these breaches in terms that people can understand. Talking about millions of people, when we're looking at the loss of maybe social security numbers, the number's so big and you think to yourself, I don't really understand how that could pertain to me. When you talk about things like social security numbers in terms of being used to, for instance, open up credit cards, and how you could have your personally identifiable information stolen or borrowed to open up lines of credit, for example, then people start to see how that relates more immediately to them. For the more math and science-oriented folks, I think they can already see how our requirements would dovetail. I think the area that we're losing the most in are more of the creatives. I think we lose a lot from art. I think we lose a lot from the people in computer science that sort of have the spark, and they think that security is sort of a dead end for people that don't have a need for intuition or being able to take that leap of faith into trying something new. When in fact, those are the exact people I would say that we need the most, especially in the research end. We need people that are looking at things outside of the box. Like how can we break into an air-gapped machine? How can we introduce Stuxnet? How can we introduce a virus into an Iranian nuclear facility without being able to approach that particular facility from the internet? We have to develop, say, a sub-operating system level, throw it on a particular device, and see what happens if we can get someone to walk in and connect it to the network. Not something a very straightforward person who's used to, again, just banging away at a keyboard until we find a solution would approach it. We need to speak to that need for creativity. And it's going back to my philosophy background, I would say there's a guy, Bernowski, who wrote a collection of essays under Science and Human Understanding. They're very short, but they articulate how much science relies on creativity. And if we can sort of refocus that in the minds of our students, I think we have a better chance of catching it. And I would also say that a lot of the problems that secondary education faces are our problems and are caused by our lack of willingness to sort of involve ourselves in the students before they get to us. We should be, and just to plug Excelsior, we just hosted a grant-funded Gen Cyber Camp where we taught 30 area high school and middle school teachers about how to teach their students about the principles of cybersecurity, things like strength of password. Don't share your password. We talked to them in terms of you wouldn't give your locker combination to somebody who's a friend today because they might not be a friend tomorrow and they might do something to your locker. You try to speak to them where they're at, and it's not an easy thing to do, and especially in academia, when we use big words like anti-disestablishmentarianism, people fall asleep before I get to the end of the word. But if we use smaller words, again, if we can make up examples in Fortnite, for example, I know I could reach middle schoolers and high schoolers immediately. If we talk about social media, if we talk about Snaps or Instagram or applications that the kids are using today, the kids.
Sorry.
That's all right. I hit 40 and it was all over. We can at least show them that their interest in technology, while not directly applicable now, if they're able to sort of appreciate technology and understand that the creativity, the stick-to-itiveness that they display playing video games, that can manifest later on with a little cultivation into a career in security.
So I think like coding has gone a long way to attract those kinds of people in terms of different lower end user products like Scratch and all the Hour of Code products that are designed not for people who really know how to code, but for people who need to learn how to think, do kind of computer thinking. And so I think that cyber probably needs something like that. And then the other thing I'm thinking about is, as a person in secondary education, if somebody like Ethan said that they wanted to partner with my school, I would immediately want to partner him with the computer science class. But knowing what he just said, it's actually a great idea to partner him with a non-traditional pathway, to partner him with an art class or some other kind of class. So maybe in forging those relationships, make sure to specifically tell people that it's not just the kids in the hoodies that you're looking for, but it's all the kids in the school. Because the kids in the hoodies tend to be pretty exclusionary. They tend to want to be an isolated club and not let other people into their club. And so letting other people know that they're welcome too, I think is a good idea.
That's a good point. So I think, right now it is 35 past. So I want to open it up to the audience to ask any questions here. I think we're the last panel for the day. So, but we want to get the take from the audience in terms of what questions you guys have about, workforce efforts going on, things that people may want to think about getting into this industry, or anything else that you've heard in this panel. Yes, in the back.
I'm sorry if I missed it. Do you have an idea of what research speaks most to the scale of the gap right now and what it's looking like in the future and how we're projected to sort of solve that? And how much that's going to cost, that kind of thing?
Sure, I can speak to that. So the question was, what's the research look like in terms of the gap? What does it look like in terms of solving it? What are the things that are out there right now, and what does the research tell us in terms of the direction? Direction's not good, so that's what the research is telling us. Now, anytime you have extrapolation from today's numbers, you're going to get weird things, right? So, hey, if we keep going down a certain path, well, if my hand keeps going like this, eventually I'm going to hit the moon. No, my hand's not eventually going to hit the moon. I'm just going to keep going as far as my arm goes, because the market forces will eventually kick in and start providing different solutions. But right now we are on track to be 2 million jobs shy by 2021. It's a situation.
That's here in the U.S.?
In the U.S., that is worldwide. In the U.S. right now, we're 720,000 jobs shy of where we need to be as current projections. for 2020.
Whose data is that?
That's from NIST.
Okay.
NIST, you can, so for those who want to learn more about the current job shortage in their area, there's actually a great website called Cyberseek. Cyberseek operates with a couple different parties. NIST points to it. And basically the Cyberseek website shows you a heat map showing you available jobs in your area, not necessarily showing you the jobs, but the volume of jobs in your area, and then what is the projected gap there. And that's where a lot of the information in terms of today's data comes from.
So also another thing that would probably be a positive step would be to have an event that's sort of like this, but with counselors, because counselors are always looking for other avenues to show their kids. And so to even have a room like this or show that heat map to counselors would be a really positive step.
Well, and the other thing too is that, market forces, they play a role. I mean, as I talked about at the beginning, average salary in DC for a cybersecurity professional is $116,000. That's going to draw people in over time. I think there's a challenge though, is that it's not a field that people feel comfortable getting into, which is why we do need more people to have conversations about how to get different folks into this industry. We also need to broaden it. So only 9% of current cybersecurity professionals are female. If you look at the general population, that doesn't seem to math doesn't seem to work out. If you want to take a scrap it from the accounting industry. So in 1950, there were only 800 certified professional accountants for women. The accounting industry said, listen, that's a real issue. We really do want to get more women into this field. It's a field that we know that has needs and growth, and we need to fulfill that. And they did a large amount of effort to try to attract more women to consider this as a career path. And it was very successful. I don't think we're not at parity, but we have gone a long way. I think there's 200,000 certified CPAs that are female in the United States right now. So it's a matter of identifying where we can bring in people who are currently not part of this conversation. As Ethan said earlier too about English majors, and as James said about, hey, we'll match them with a computer science program, or maybe we should match them with a history program. Maybe we should match them up with the arts program, or maybe the criminal justice program. So as we broaden that view of who can be participating, it's going to open up new doors. The last thing I'll leave you guys with too is on this topic, although we're happy to get more questions, is that one of the fastest growing female-led C-suite titles is the Chief Privacy Officer. Because this is an area that is touching on cybersecurity, that's touching on IT, but also has its roots in legislation, law, policy. And people are gravitating towards that. So there are ways that we can reach out to different audiences and say, hey, listen, this is you're doing one thing, and say privacy. There are alignments of privacy with cybersecurity. Perhaps you're interested in a career change, and that might draw other folks in as well.
Just wanted to give a plug too for career and technical education in high schools. So career and technical education, or VOPROs, or vocational high schools, have really come a long way in the last couple of decades. And so I know that Capital Region BOCES is currently doing a lot to try to develop programming that meets this need specifically. But meeting with local BOCES and other organizations to talk to them about the need, like they're designed so that they can address workforce needs. So they do that all the time, and when markets go up and down, they change their programs. And so you'd be really surprised at the programs that you'd find in a vocational high school right now. So it's not just like carpentry and electrical trades anymore.
Cisco,
all kinds of stuff. Yeah.
Cisco, all that kind of stuff. Other questions from the audience? Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure. So how realistic do you think it is that we'll see state or federal support for, let's say, K through 12, more grassroots effort to grow interest or curriculum in cybersecurity?
So I'm going to repeat the question just because we're recording and they won't pick it up. So how realistic is it that we'll see federal funding for K through 12 education efforts on cybersecurity?
I can speak directly to that. The Gen Cyber program initiated through a joint effort by the NSF and the DoD, in addition to NSA support, is setting up a number of grants. Last year, or this past year, there were 156 grants earning, on average, about $90,000 to $100,000 each, in an effort to either teach middle school and high school teachers, or to reach out to K through 12 students directly at some camps. I know in South Dakota, California, they've already progressed to the point where, again, they have sleepaway camps, where 20, 40, 100 students are able to go and work on sort of intro-level coding skills or cybersecurity skills. Those efforts are already underway. And through NIST, we're also looking at the CIA triad about confidentiality, accessibility, and integrity as sort of being the three pillars. They also have identified sort of 10 guidelines that we want to teach students about departmentalization and modularization and how all these concepts are important. It really is a sort of a top-down effort to try to codify these things first before we just tell everyone, go ahead and preach the gospel of cybersecurity, but everyone's speaking in a different language. No two of these sort of cybersecurity cults meet or speak to the same principles. So they are trying to do that first and then push the way. Also, this is really, this came on fast. Like there were hints that cybersecurity was going to be important in the late 90s, 2000, but even the most prescient people didn't see the need for as many of these professionals until we got to sort of the post 9/11 era, working on towards 2007, 2008. So we're playing a game of catch up right now. Other people that were out there, they were popularized in the media. I mean, I'm sorry ahead of time for those of you that have seen the movie Hackers, but movies like that or war games really sort of popularized the idea that security was so lax, it was sort of an afterthought to these systems that if you had a password, you were safe, or if you had that backdoors existed into systems because coders are lazy. I can attest to that. We are. We didn't take that sort of popular influence and parlay that into something useful, and right now we're getting to that.
And I'm remiss if we didn't talk about how CIS does sponsor some stuff like this as well too. We run the Cyber Challenge, which is a challenge where people get asked questions on cybersecurity, and that rolls up to camps that are occurring across the country as well too. And then there's even job fairs and other things associated with it. And we have our own, researches out there too that we help provide and obviously participate with James's university or high school, as well as working with a lot of other universities like SUNY Albany, some other universities to help broaden it. So, and we are partially federally funded to do these things. Question, leave there, ma'am.
There are seemingly dozens of code camps that take people at any age from totally inexperienced to job ready within 6 months. But that mostly addresses just web app development for the most part. Why aren't we seeing equivalent growth in cybersecurity boot camps?
So the question for the recording is that there are a lot of these coding camps that teach you how to build applications, but there's not as much of the camps for cybersecurity, like how do you pen test and break things down. Ethan and James, will get your take on that one, but I think it's interesting. Was it Black Hat? It was DEFCON. I forget which one of them. They had kids come through and try to take down election-based websites. So I think you're starting to see, and Tyler, who's organizing this event, to his credit, has invited a lot of high school kids. He made it very open to people to come out to this conference. I think you're starting to see people do more of that, but you're right. There is not enough. We have a few camps ourselves, CS runs. There's a few other programs that are like that. There is some other initiatives that are coming down the pike that are going to be broader. A couple states are sponsoring some larger camps and other programs. But you're right, we're kind of, as you said, we're playing catch up on the cybersecurity issue. I think STEM has been a long time focus for where we need to put people in, and coding is a really good example of STEM. If you understand how to do coding, you can really translate to a lot of different things within that STEM sector. Cybersecurity is a little bit more of a specialized discipline to some extent. And so therefore I think there's not as much emphasis on it, but that's changing.
I would also say that it's sort of a pedagogical issue. Teaching programming, you're coming, at least in the very beginning, you're coming from, here's an outcome we're trying to reach. These are the steps that you take and the language that you use to describe and achieve that outcome. In cybersecurity, there is some level of background knowledge that you need in order to make this work. You don't need to know the program, but if I say, okay, stop, show me how you brush your teeth. Your algorithm is brushing your teeth. Show me how you would stop somebody brushing your teeth from another room using some sort of device or other methods. You would need to be able to, for instance, look at a network, understand how networking works, or how wireless communication works, or how operating systems work, in general, not specific, but broad strokes, how these things happen. And then you're sort of scaffolding that information, whereas again, programming, much easier design-wise. You're starting with a concept and executing from start to finish how that happens. Right? So we're making steps in that direction. There's a lot of very smart people working on it, but again, before we can't just sit somebody down and say, okay, here's cybersecurity writ large. Here are tools that we use to monitor network traffic. Here's what network traffic is. Here's what a network does. Here's what's going over a network, and here's how we basically have to work backwards to come up with a lesson plan, and then cram all that in to get to the interesting, cool stuff. I would say that's part of the problem, if that helps. But the effort is in place to try to do that. And we can start, kids from a very young age are able to do this. We saw this back in early 2000s with Raspberry Pis. When they were first introduced in London, they were used first as like a platform for Python, but now that not now, but even then they were so cheap, you could network them together, you could simulate several computers on the network, and you can try to attack and defend from there. Before I ramble too far on, there were a couple questions.
Yeah, there's one other question in the back there.
Oh, yeah, I just wanted to know, would it be possible if I answered her question? Just because it's more profitable to be a bad guy than a good guy right now. And so, and the second part of that question is, I think the gentleman to the right has
Oh, I was just curious,
Oh, the record show is crossed.
I'll answer my question myself offline here.
All right, great. And we can talk offline. I think there's a lot of interesting concepts there. Anybody have any other questions before class is dismissed? Yes, in the back, sir.
You've touched a lot on getting the younger generation in. Do you know of any initiatives to get the older generation in? Myself, I'm a little bit beyond this. I'm a little bit older. I've actually just started my education.
Excelsior College.
It's my whole job.
Yeah. So the question is, how do we get the older generation interested in cybersecurity? And Ethan, I mean. Well, I think there's something to be said for that general question.
I find it daunting. So I'm getting ready to finish a 2-year degree, and I don't feel like I know enough, and I'm looking to go to a 4-year degree, and just like looking at some of these jobs, and they're like, well, you need this, and this, and this, and this, and this, and
Welcome to imposter syndrome.
okay.
And everyone starting out or making a career change is going to feel the same way. Now, again, reaching for the stars and banking all of your hopes on one particular job, like I want that job as the director of networks at Google with a 2-year degree.
No.
Your arm has to be extra long for that one. But you can reach for something more local, or you can say, I'm at a particular place, I need maybe a little bit more, and then you can also either continue on to a 4-year degree or look at certificates to supplement, like a CISP or something like that.
And to support the certificates thing. So there's different types of certificates. There's CISP, there's the CompTIA. I've taken SANS certifications myself. And one of the things that's unique about SANS, which I kind of like, not necessarily unique, but it's an open book test. And they're the hardest open book test for certification I've ever taken in my entire life. But the reason why it's open book is that in the real world, you can go find answers. You know what I mean? It's not like you're sitting in by yourself and you can't go to Google. You can find answers. So the challenge of feeling like, how do I get started on this? Where do I go? Just doing what you're doing, which is for those on the record, it's done to your college stint to try to get into the space. You're going to be in a position to start looking at these jobs and feeling more comfortable about it. And I think for most folks who are doing career changes, getting into it will put you in a position to talk about it. I mean, thankfully for many of us, or for many people in this field, there's no shortage of opportunities. So if you're just starting out, you should be able to find something that you can get your teeth into to start moving on to the next point. And then eventually you will be the director of security for Google.
And even bad guys are looking for help. They still are online. The Dread Pirate Roberts, if you look at how he was discovered, he used his basically a publicly known name on a help site. He had subsequently changed it, but not before he was identified and pinched by the FBI. Yes.
So we'll have to conclude now, just got the hand number there, but for folks sticking around, James, Ethan, and I will be here for a little while, and thank you all for joining for this great panel.
Thank you.